Good evening. Historic times as King Charles III is officially crowned as the new king. Also, as the race for the White House heats up, ongoing issues at the U.S. southern border. Hello there. Good evening, and thank you so much for being with us on this truly historic day. Not just for Britain, as it officially gets a new monarch, as King Charles III is crowned as the new king, but also a direct connection constitutionally to countries like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. What will the impact of a new monarch on those countries be? We'll have the latest analysis and the latest developments on some of these historic events that have unfolded over the course of today, coming up exclusively on the program tonight. Well, let's dig a little bit deeper now into that impact. What type of an impact will the new monarch, King Charles III, have on countries who are connected to the monarchy, as I mentioned, like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand? Earlier, I spoke with former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien in an exclusive conversation about what this new monarch could mean for Canada, as well as some of the issues that may need mending, such as the relationship between Indigenous peoples and the monarchy.
Joining me now is Jean Chrétien, the former Prime Minister of Canada, to discuss the historical aspects, the fact that this is the first time that a new monarch will be crowned in more than 7 decades. Mr. Prime Minister, let's start there. What do you make of the historical aspects of this, the fact that, again, it is the first time a new monarch will be crowned in more than 7 decades?
It's very important because the Queen was serving the Commonwealth and Great Britain with great style and devotion. And now, unfortunately, we lost her, but her son was the one to take over, and he's taken over, but he has been well prepared to play that role. I had the occasion to meet him in 1970 at the occasion of the centennial of the Northwest Territories. I spent 4 days in the north with him and the Queen and the Prince Philip and Princess Anne, and I was with my wife and daughter. So I started to know them at that time, and I want to wish him the best of luck.
And obviously the fact that he is being crowned this coming weekend is a result, as you mentioned, of the unfortunate passing of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. You were Prime Minister during about 1/7 of her time as the official monarch of Britain and other countries who are in the form of a constitutional monarchy like Canada. Perhaps do you have any memories of Queen Elizabeth?
Oh, but I met her in 1968 when it was a centennial of Canada, and as I said, I met her many, many times, and she was a great monarch and a great person. And, you know, she was speaking in French with me all the time. She was practicing her French with me, and she gave me the Order of Merit. I was the 4th Canadian since 1902 to get this great honor. So I know for a Canadian, I had an occasion to a very good relation with her over a long period of time.
And obviously Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and everyone else in the government had a very great relationship with Queen Elizabeth. From your perspective, how can people in the government of Canada, people in other governments, build as strong a relationship with someone like King Charles?
Oh, I think that it's part of our institution, and there's always a great respect to the monarch from the Canadian prime ministers. Nobody has ever been outside of that mold, and I think this is the right thing to do.
And a lot of people are also arguing that perhaps it's time to have a conversation about how the monarchy is used in Canada, how Canada is connected to the monarchy. I mean, where do you fall on that debate, and how do you think Canada should be related to the monarchy?
You know, it will be it's extremely difficult for a Canadian to change it because of the Canadian Constitution. To be obliged, if we would like to change it, we need the consent of all the provinces. And I'm sure that it would be very, very difficult to achieve. So, and it's working quite well. It's not a problem for Canadians. You know, we have a Governor General that represents the King, and, you know, the system is working well. And in fact, it's a nice way. We need a president or a representative of the king because if there is a big problem in the government, they need someone to arbitrate who should be the next prime minister. If there is too many problems with the election of governments and minority government being defeated and so on. So this role is played in Canada by the Governor General, and if it was not a Governor General, we would have to have somebody else to play the same role. So it will be, there's no cost to Canadians to have the monarchy, and when they come in Canada, they are always welcome, and it's an institution that will be very difficult to change. So why to lose our time to debate it?
And a lot of people, too, are wondering about kind of the pomp and circumstance, so to speak, how the actual ceremony itself on Saturday is going to unfold. What are you expecting? The fact that a lot of world leaders are going to be together to see, again, a new monarch crowned, the first time in 7 decades that will have happened.
Oh, but because, this is the most illustrious royal family around the globe, and Great Britain, there's 54 countries or so in the Commonwealth, so the people wants to be there, and they will be the countries that are close to Great Britain will be there. I'm sure the Americans would send either the president or I think it's his wife going, and then France and Germany and the leaders of all these countries will be there. And it is normal because we are all having good relations with Great Britain.
And a lot of people, too, are mentioning the fact that someone like King Charles III, not only is a monarch, but also an advocate for many important issues that the government here in Canada is looking to address, issues like Indigenous reconciliation, something that is likely a good thing given the fact that, with colonialism, et cetera, colonization, the government and King Charles III is going to need to mend their relationship with Indigenous people as best as possible. How does someone like King Charles try to repair the relationship with Indigenous people, something that was perhaps harmed during the process of colonization?
He has no political freedom, the prince. He has the right, the king, he has the right to have some views, but he cannot have views that are contrary to the views of government. It is not his role. He has to be very discreet about his political opinion on different problems. Sometimes they can speak, but they cannot do it in a way that it is causing a controversy within the land. So he has some restriction, but he has shown in the past that he was very preoccupied with the problem of the climate change and the problem of the Canada of Indians or slavery and all these problems that seems to be in the headline these days.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, thanks so much for taking the time.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right, we're going to take a short break. After the break, we will have a look at the headlines as well as some of the other news unfolding. Obviously, the big story of today is the coronation of King Charles III, but lots of news stories at home in North America are taking shape as well. We'll have the latest on that right after the break. Stay with us. All right. Hello. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. Before the break, former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien talking to me about the relationship between the monarchy and countries like Canada, who are constitutionally, through its system of government, connected to the monarchy. Now, a look at some of the headlines. Obviously, with this historic day, it's getting a lot of attention, but there are still some news stories here in North America and around the world that are still taking shape and shaping a lot of current issues and a lot of discourse really here in North America as well. Well, the situation in Alberta, Canada, is a dire situation, quite literally, with wildfires raging across the province, also as the province is in the midst of a provincial election campaign. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith spoke with reporters earlier today, where she was questioned time and time again as to whether or not she could, and if it was in her powers, to put the election campaign on hold to deal with a more pressing issue. Smith said she has spoken with official opposition NDP leader Rachel Notley, who also happens to be her main competitor in the election campaign, about some of these wildfires and how they are raging across Alberta. Smith also said that looking at the possibility of declaring a province-wide state of emergency is still on the table. Wellington Halton Hills MP and the Conservative Party's Foreign Affairs critic in Canada, Michael Chong, is in the news a lot recently after supposedly a Chinese diplomat had made threats to his family. Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino spoke at the Liberal Party's convention to reporters that took place over the course of the past couple of days and even into today as well. Mendicino said that the government is still investigating why warnings that a Conservative MP was never brought to any cabinet minister in particular. And now more on that Liberal Party convention that was held from Thursday up until today. Some key policy discussions happening about how the governing party, the Liberal Party of Canada, will move forward into the next election campaign, which ministers and party commentators did say repeatedly at the event they are hoping is not until 2025. At the convention, it garnered a lot of attention, including keynote speeches from both former Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, who you actually heard from earlier on in the program, and also the former Secretary of State in the U.S. and the former 2016 Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton, both of whom spoke at the convention, talking about a range of different issues, specifically zoning in on progressive politics, feminism, as well as with Hillary Clinton in conversation with Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, where they talked very much in depth about the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Also, here is what we can keep watching for. The race for the White House in 2024 is ongoing. Coming up on Monday on the program, I will speak exclusively to former Arkansas governor and 2024 presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson, who is going to join me on the program. Be sure to be on the lookout for that. But one key issue in the 2024 presidential campaign is issues at the U.S. southern border. I spoke with former Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson on that. That conversation will be coming up in just a little bit, so do be sure to stay with us for that conversation as well. All right, that was a look at some of the latest headlines that are taking shape across North America today amidst a truly historic day with the coronation of King Charles III officially underway. Earlier, I had the chance to speak with the British High Commissioner to Canada, Susanna Goshko, about the relationship between Canada and the monarchy and what she has to say, what the High Commissioner has to say, but perhaps some of those people who believe it may be time to move on from the monarchy. Here is that conversation. Madam High Commissioner, thanks so much for making the time.
Great to be here with you.
Let's just start out with what the upcoming coronation will mean for the relationship between Canada and the British monarchy, as well as with other countries who have a similar style of government as Canada, with a constitutional monarchy giving the monarch kind of symbolic powers with an official representative with the Governor General. What are you expecting it to mean in regards to that relationship?
Well, when the British Foreign Secretary was here in Canada earlier this year, he said, talking about the UK-Canada relationship, that, the UK has lots of friends around the world, but it's different with Canada. We're family. And I think the fact that we share a monarch, that the king is simultaneously the king of Canada and the king of the United Kingdom, is a really good way of symbolizing that family. We share a common set of values that the king embodies. And this coronation is a moment where all of that comes together. We see the stability of our democracy and our shared values celebrated on the world stage.
And moving forward after the coronation of His Majesty King Charles III, obviously a lot of people, when the death of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II occurred earlier in September, the conversation about the relationship between the monarchy and countries who are connected to the monarchy was happening in great detail. What do you make of the argument that some people are making that the monarchy, for example, with Canada's Indigenous population, how can the new monarch mend that relationship and make it better so that people like Indigenous peoples can have confidence in their system of government?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'd say that the king has visited Canada a number of times. He's been here 18 times in an official capacity. He's traveled to each of the provinces, and in all of those visits, he spent a huge amount of time talking to and listening to Indigenous leaders and really understanding what that means for Canada. In terms of his relevance, he has said that he prioritizes 4 things, and that is community, youth, sustainability, and diversity. And for me, when I think about Canada, those are 4 words that really resonate with Canadian values as well. The work he's done on environmental causes, which spans back decades, not something now we're all talking about the environment, but he's been talking about this for decades. And it really strikes me that there's a huge amount in common between those things that are dear and important to the king and those things that are dear and important to Canada.
And obviously, Queen Elizabeth II was a monarch who had served for a very long while. A lot of people who are currently alive today, that was the only monarch that they had ever known. What are you expecting King Charles III, as he officially is crowned and the first sovereign to be crowned in more than about 7 decades or so? What are you expecting that to mean? And just overall, what are you expecting to take place with the coronation?
Yeah, you're right that it's a funny thing. The Queen came to the throne in her early 20s, before there was social media, and then, spent many, many years, 70 years as our Queen, the only Queen many of us have known. And so we really got to know her in that capacity, whereas the King comes to the throne with decades of life experience. So it's really a different kind of feel to it. But I think that means that what we'll see is him continuing to value those things that he's valued to date. So those things I talked about, I think he'll continue to care a lot about the environment and to put a lot of emphasis into that. A lot of thought into youth. For example, he set up the Prince's Trust, which looks at supporting disadvantaged youth, and continue to think about how he can bring communities together. Those are the things that over decades have really mattered to him. And I think we'll see him continue to prioritize those issues.
And just before we conclude, how can a country like Canada move forward with the coronation of King Charles III, improve the relationship with the monarchy? What are you expecting it to mean for that relationship?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And obviously the government of Canada is the sort of owner of that relationship. But what I know is that the King really likes Canada. There's a great quote from one of his trips here before where he said something like, every time I come to Canada, it seeps a bit more into my blood and really becomes a part of me, or some such thing. I think, you know, he'll be keen to get here. He'll be keen to carry on that conversation with all the people in Canada in all of its diversity, and to continue to think about how he strengthens the relationship.
All right, we will leave it there. That is the British High Commissioner to Canada, Susanna Gushko. Thanks so much for making the time. Really appreciate it.
Great to talk to you, Wyatt.
Royal commentator Bonnie Brownlee also joined me earlier on the program to discuss some of the key issues that King Charles III will be facing, including the relationship between the monarchy and Indigenous peoples and how he can mend the relationship. Royal commentator Bonnie Brownlee joins me now. Bonnie, thanks so much for taking the time.
Glad to be with you, Wyatt.
Let's just start out with what you are expecting as the, I guess you could call it festivities, celebrations get underway, the first coronation of a British monarch in more than 7 decades. What are you expecting to take place?
Well, you know, the city, which I'm going to this evening, is already decorated and ready. They've been rehearsing for the last few weeks at midnight with the horse carriages and the military processions. So the Brits are ready for it. They've been watching this unfold over the last few weeks. Some are happy about it and some are not, just the same as people here in Canada are feeling.
And what do you make of the relationship between the monarch and various segments of the population? For example, a discussion that I've been having throughout the program is the relationship between Canada and Canada's Indigenous peoples, how that relates to the monarch, to King Charles III. What do you think someone like King Charles will need to do in order to perhaps mend some of those relationships with people like Canada's Indigenous population?
King Charles has a lot of work to do, and he knows it. He's going to start taking a serious look at where, for instance, apologies need to be made throughout the Commonwealth, and of course with Indigenous communities all throughout the Commonwealth, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. So we'll see work being done. He's been working on it for the past few years anyway, and it became different when he was, you know, king in last September. So he's got a group of people around him, and hopefully it won't be a long bureaucratic process before they actually start to reach some sensible, a sensible look at what a modern monarchy will look like.
And what are you, just before we conclude, what are you expecting that relationship to be like moving forward, not just with a country like Canada, but with Australia, New Zealand, other countries who are connected to the monarchy in similar ways as Canada? And obviously this comes at a time when, after the death of Queen Elizabeth, Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, there were some conversations being had about to what extent should Canada, stay connected in the way that it is to the monarchy. I mean, what are the future of those types of conversations, and what are you expecting for a country like Canada, again, Australia or New Zealand?
Well, in our country, we've seen some of the leger. There's some polling been out recently that's showing that there's a slight down, a down in the numbers in our relationship about how we feel about the monarchy. So again, this is the work where I believe that some form of new narrative may have to approach for what the Commonwealth is and what our relationships are with it. Because, you know, in many ways, you're going to be watching a ceremony on Saturday for a coronation that started well over 1,000 years ago. This is about the 39th monarch that's gone through this, and to some extent it even feels a bit archaic. So and some of the countries of the Commonwealth, I believe, will leave in the next year or two. So the whole reframing of what that relationship is the work that has to be done. And I do know that King Charles has a committee set up within the royal households now to discuss slavery issues and where apologies should be made and by whom. So that work is coming.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Royal commentator Bonnie Brownlee. Bonnie, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we are going to take a quick break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us amidst this truly historic day as King Charles III is officially crowned as the new monarch, the new British monarch. Of course, a lot of political issues are also taking shape, the political aspect of things. Various countries, including Canada and the US, as well as New Zealand and the United Kingdom, plenty of countries sending representatives to the coronation of the king. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met with the New Zealand Prime Minister, also with the United Kingdom Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. On the US side of things, President Joe Biden did not attend the coronation. That is perhaps expected, though, given that the US does not really share any direct connection to the British monarchy in the way that a country like Canada, New Zealand, or Australia may. First Lady Dr. Jill Biden did, however, attend in place of President Joe Biden. What should we make of some of the political aspect of things? Michael Serapio is the host of Primetime Politics on CPAC. Michael Serapio, thanks so much for taking the time.
Hey, very happy to join you, Wyatt.
So let's just start out, obviously, with the historical significance of something like this, the first time that a new monarch will be crowned in more than 7 decades. Obviously, Canada's relationship with the monarchy is something that is very much in debate, you could say. A lot of people, given the connection it has to Indigenous peoples, some of them feel kind of left out in this process. What ultimately are you expecting as it gets underway, and what do you think it might mean for some of those relationships?
Well, it's really interesting because, of course, the Prime Minister and the Governor General, they will be attending the coronation. But you're right, this is, it's been marked that this is an inflection point when it comes to not only Canada's relationship with the monarchy, but really even the British people's relationship with the monarchy. And, not surprisingly, the support for monarchy is strongest in England, where, of course, it all begins when it comes to the Commonwealth. But here in Canada, as you say, there was just this Angus Reid poll that came out a couple of weeks ago, which essentially pointed to the fact that a majority of Canadians don't really want to have Charles as king, nor do they really want to have Camilla acknowledged as queen. And when it comes to the place of the crown in Canada, that is something that, in particular, younger Canadians would like to revisit. Not an easy thing, though, as you probably well know. It actually takes unanimous consent of all provinces, territories, and federal government to essentially remove the monarch, the King Charles in this case, as this country's head of state. So it would require unanimity, it would require a constitutional change, and no one is speaking out right now about reopening the Constitution to address this. But without a doubt, this is a relationship that many Canadians are thinking about. And perhaps that's not surprising, because many experts had pointed out that, the respect for the crown really was tied to Queen Elizabeth in this country, because the vast majority of Canadians grew up with Queen Elizabeth or was born into a country where the Queen was a fact of life. So now that it is King Charles that will be coronated, I think that's when the discussions happen. And in a lot of ways, I don't believe that Buckingham Palace is ignorant of that fact. They know that they do have a challenge on their hands. Thanks to the democratization of news, King Charles doesn't really have a lot of secrets that we weren't a part of, including the affair that he had with Camilla while he was married to Diana, the Princess of Wales at the time. So I think all of that factors into the kind of feelings that we're seeing about King Charles in particular. But when it comes to monarch, the question does hang for many Canadians. What does the monarchy do in terms of Canada? How does it reflect the Canadian modern reality? Where, of course, the argument against that will be that the crown has been this symbol of continuity, that we are able to have changes of government, be able to far more criticize the head of government because the head of state is a separate entity away from that. So those are the kind of arguments that you will hear. And, you also mentioned the First Nations people. Without a doubt, the crown and the Queen in particular, who they refer to as a grandmother, there is a special relationship between Indigenous peoples and the Crown because the treaties were signed on behalf of the Crown, not with provinces, not with, for the most part, the federal government historically, but with the Crown. And so I think this is for Indigenous people as we walk down this road to reconciliation. I think that's part of the conversation. Although what I've also seen is Indigenous people wanting to really remind Charles that he is not only the head of state of this country, but also has a particular responsibility when it comes to Indigenous communities in this country as they seek reconciliation and far more acknowledgement of what they have gone through in this country.
And you mentioned the question that a lot of people are kind of asking themselves in a historic moment like this is what is the overall purpose of the monarchy, in Canada's case, a constitutional monarchy, and what will it ultimately do for Canada? And I mean, you cited the Angus Reid poll that was unveiled. How does someone like, the Prime Minister, people in the government who are quite loyal to the monarchy, how do they convince, some of those Angus Reid respondents, for example, who aren't so sure that Canada is well placed within the monarchy, that the monarchy is something that, should exist and that Canada should be connected to?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if that's so much an onus that you can put onto the prime minister or to anyone really, unless they really do want to step forward and be an advocate for the crown. And I don't see that necessarily happening because, of course, as head of government, they are dealing with far more immediate issues for Canadians, receiving a lot of criticism on other issues. So that's what will really occupy their time. I think much more when you talk about or question how does the crown prove its relevance? Well, really, that does fall upon the crown. What's interesting here is that Charles, as Prince of Wales, he visited Canada, I think, more than any other member of the royal family, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that the Buckingham Palace views Canada as a key country within the Commonwealth. Us along with New Zealand and Australia, I think you could describe us as linchpin countries because if we and our compatriots, Australia and New Zealand, were to ever decide to be a republic without the crown, that creates a domino effect. And I think they're already feeling that pressure, certainly when they had their Caribbean tour, when Prince William and Catherine had their Caribbean tour, they received a lot of criticism about the historic role that the crown has played in terms of racial oppression. They certainly are feeling the pressure of that same Republican tide within the former British colonies in Africa. And of course, when it comes to the Caribbean, the Bahamas essentially got rid of the monarchy as their head of state. So when you ask the question about relevancy, ultimately that's going to go to the king. It will go towards Buckingham Palace to figure out how they remain relevant here in Canada, and in some ways with the Governor General's office. But it is without a doubt a question and a debate that many Canadians are engaging in right now.
All right. We are going to take a quick break. We will be right back. Please stay with us. Well, the situation in Alberta, Canada, is a dire situation, quite literally, with wildfires raging across the province. Also, as the province is in the midst of a provincial election campaign, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith spoke with reporters earlier today, where she was questioned time and time again as to whether or not she could, and if it was in her powers, to put the election campaign on hold to deal with a more pressing issue. Smith said she has spoken with official opposition NDP leader Rachel Notley, who also happens to be her main competitor in the election campaign, about some of these wildfires and how they are raging across Alberta. Smith also said that looking at the possibility of declaring a province-wide state of emergency is still on the table. Wellington Halton Hills MP and the Conservative Party's foreign affairs critic in Canada, Michael Chong, is in the news a lot recently after supposedly a Chinese diplomat had made threats to his family. Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino spoke at the Liberal Party's convention to reporters that took place over the course of the past couple of days and even into today as well. Mendicino said that the government is still investigating why warnings that a Conservative MP was never brought to any cabinet minister in particular. And now more on that Liberal Party convention that was held from Thursday up until today. Some key policy discussions happening about how the governing party, the Liberal Party of Canada, will move forward into the next election campaign, which ministers and party commentators did say repeatedly at the event they are hoping is not until 2025. At the convention, it garnered a lot of attention, including keynote speeches from both former Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, who you actually heard from earlier on in the program, and also the former Secretary of State in the U.S. and the former 2016 Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton, both of whom spoke at the convention, talking about a range of different issues, specifically zoning in on progressive politics, feminism, as well as with Hillary Clinton in conversation with Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, where they talked very much in depth about the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Also, here is what we can keep watching for. The race for the White House in 2024 is ongoing. Coming up on Monday on the program, I will speak exclusively to former Arkansas governor and 2024 presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson, who is going to join me on the program. Be sure to be on the lookout for that. But one key issue in the 2024 presidential campaign is issues at the U.S. southern border. I spoke with former Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson on that. That conversation will be coming up in just a little bit, so do be sure to stay with us for that conversation as well. All right, hello there. Thank you so much for being with us, of course, tonight, as again, as we've been saying all throughout the program, a truly historic day as a new monarch is crowned, the first time in more than 7 decades that has happened. Of course, how did we get here? Of course, that was due to the passing of Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, in September after some health concerns and some health challenges that really arose suddenly within the same day. And then, of course, some Balmoral news, as well as various members of the royal family had been rushed to Balmoral to be with Her Majesty by her side for one last moment. So, of course, that was a truly sad time. Of course, before that, you had Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee. The mood in London for the Platinum Jubilee would be much like it is right now for the coronation. And then, of course, the funeral in between these two events, very much a subdued and sad mood and sad event as to what was taking place. Another aspect, we've been talking a lot throughout the program about the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. The fact that the U.S. does not share any direct connection to the British monarchy, the fact that President Joe Biden is not attending the coronation. Instead, First Lady Dr. Jill Biden is attending. Well, earlier I had the chance to speak with Matthew Barzun, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom. We talked about some of the critics criticizing President Joe Biden for not attending the coronation and what to make of the fact that First Lady Dr. Jill Biden will be attending, as well as the historic relationship between some countries with the monarchy and the not so in-depth relationship between the US and the monarchy. Joining me now is Matthew Burson, the former US ambassador to the United Kingdom. Thanks so much for making the time.
Thanks so much for having me, Wyatt.
So let's just start out with what you are expecting with the upcoming events with the coronation of King Charles III, and what it might say about the relationship between the United States and the monarchy, given that there's not a lot of historic ties.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? As an American, talking about, in general abstract terms, about the British monarchy, given the formation of our country, 1776 and all that. What I'll be focused on is sort of the particular, and his late mother, the Queen. I think for so many Americans, forget what we might think about monarchies in the abstract. She made it real. She made it personal. And so many Americans from across our country, across the political spectrum, felt this connection. And they felt, I think many, a sense of sadness and loss when she passed away. So in answer to your question, I will be looking for what things stay the same in terms of these, to Americans anyway, sort of bafflingly ancient, distant ceremonies and sort of the pomp and circumstance. And then what new elements does the new king and his wife, what do they want to, the Queen Consort, what do they want to add to it to make it their own? Because I think the history of these things is there is continuity and there's also change. That's what I'll be looking out for.
And what do you make of the level? You mentioned that a lot of people, really liked the Queen Elizabeth II, someone who was, even though the United States didn't have a large connection to the monarchy, again, someone who was still beloved by people who resided in many countries. King Charles seems to have a little bit more controversy, a little bit more of a gap between those who, really like him and those who might have some skepticism. What do you make of that?
Well, it's true. And when you speak about connection, Wyatt, I mean, we do have this official connection because our two countries we used to be one, then we were bitter enemies, fought two wars against each other, and then we're sort of wary for each other for about 100 years, and then have become, over my lifetime, I'm a bit older than you, I think I can safely make that assumption, we've become incredibly close friends, and Churchill coined the phrase, the special relationship. It is special. And that special friendship doesn't only exist between the prime minister over there and our president here. It exists thousands and millions of connections between its citizens, including its head of state, which of course is the monarch. So sometimes I think people misunderstand that special relationship, and they think that we do hard things together, whether it's World War II, whether it's things in the Cold War, standing together with NATO for what's going on in Ukraine, a subject I know you've covered. We don't do hard things together because we're friends. There's some truth to that, but the powerful thing is that we are friends because we have done hard things together, right? And friendship, as I'm sure you've discovered, isn't one of those things that you aim for if you want it. It's a byproduct of other things, and namely a byproduct of hard work. And I think there's lots of hard work that the United States and United Kingdom are doing right now and need to keep doing. And therefore, the friendship will grow and evolve based on that hard work that we do together.
And I guess just generally speaking, what do you expect the upcoming coronation to mean, given that it is the first coronation in about 7 decades?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be looking out for what stays the same. I'll be looking out for what changes. One thing I think that Queen Elizabeth II, his mother, did beautifully, and it's sort of a visual image here. If you think about the Queen as this finger here, and then public opinion here, she was able, if you read her obituaries, the word that came up so often was steadfast. But steadfast doesn't mean staying in one place. Because if she had stayed in one place, public opinion moves on. She would have felt out of step. If she had got ahead of public opinion, she'd be out of step in a different way. And so the challenge is, how do you constantly stay true to values and evolve so that the appearance is to be steadfast, but to be. And so I think now King Charles has seen what it's like to be slightly out of step behind. I think he's also seen what it's like to be out of step out in front of where other people were. I think importantly on issues like the environment, which I know is so important to your generation as well as mine. And he too will discover how to do that balance in terms of continuity and change.
Okay, we'll leave it there. That's Matthew Burton, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom. Thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, I want to go now as well. Also with us is Peter MacKay, who is the former Minister of National Defense and Foreign Affairs, who I spoke with about some of the aspects of what is happening with the coronation. Of course, again, we've been saying it all along. I'll keep saying it. The first time a monarch has been crowned in more than 7 decades. And of course, it will be a historic day with the coronation of King Charles III. Joining me now to discuss some of the latest on that is Peter MacKay, the former Defense Minister and former Foreign Affairs Minister. Peter, thanks so much for making the time.
It's my pleasure, Wyatt. Nice to be with you again.
Let's just start out with the historical aspect of this, what it might mean for Canada, the relationship between Canada and the monarchy. Some Canadians feel that given the fact that the monarch only has symbolic powers in Canada, that it might be time to look at perhaps having the monarchy take up a smaller role in Canada. I guess, what do you make of some of those arguments?
Well, firstly, I think the monarchy has been kind of a mainstay in a lot of people's lives, not in a substantive way or something that had a profound impact on their day-to-day lives, but it's been part of the traditions of our country going right back, in fact, to the very origins and before, in fact. And so the royal family is something that many people, certainly myself, my parents and grandparents grew up with. Whether this is a tradition that should continue or not, and whether symbolically it will remain part of people's daily lives is really not something that the government can control per se. If there was a referendum, I suppose, to sever ties with the monarchy, that might impact on this. But it's really now something of choice, whether people decide to follow the royal family, and as many will probably take part in watching the coronation of King Charles. And of course, we have many symbols in terms of our money, traditions. The Canadian Forces regiments have attachments to the military. And so it's part of the fabric of who we are in many ways, but not perhaps as important as it used to be.
And what do you make of the relationship between the monarchy and certain segments of the population in Canada? Particularly, you could look at Canada's Indigenous population, something that when the death of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II occurred, the conversation about the relationship between the Crown and Indigenous peoples was happening in great discussion. Do you think those discussions may continue? And what do you think someone like King Charles III or other people who are directly associated with the monarchy can do to try and repair relationships, not just with Indigenous peoples, but with other populations who perhaps they haven't historically had a great relationship with?
Yeah, that's a fair comment. And the whole issue around colonization, of course, is tied into the monarchy in many ways, and Great Britain, of course. And so for Indigenous people, they view the royal family and the connections to the monarchy as quite different, just as they do, for example, with churches, for good reason. And so reconciliation and the discussion that you referenced, I think, will continue. King Charles, not unlike his mother and his ancestors, does, I think, understand and perhaps appreciates in a more modern sense the necessity to put things in historical context. He is somebody who perhaps has a historic opportunity here to further these efforts of reconciliation, understanding. We've seen historic apologies. We've seen in fact, King Charles play a more active role from a monarch's perspective in pronouncements on global warming and calls for environmental action. That wasn't something normally associated with the royal family. So one would hope that he and his son, Prince William, Princess Kate, that they will, or consort Kate will continue to try to keep pace with the times, I guess is how I would put it, Wyatt.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, a look at some of the latest headlines that are currently taking shape in North America. Although it is, of course, a truly historic day with the coronation, a lot of stories are happening at home in North America. We will have those headlines right after the break. Well, the situation in Alberta, Canada, is a dire situation, quite literally, with wildfires raging across the province. Also, as the province is in the midst of a provincial election campaign, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith spoke with reporters earlier today, where she was questioned time and time again as to whether or not she could, and if it was in her powers, to put the election campaign on hold to deal with a more pressing issue. Smith said she has spoken with official opposition NDP leader Rachel Notley, who also happens to be her main competitor in the election campaign, about some of these wildfires and how they are raging across Alberta. Smith also said that looking at the possibility of declaring a province-wide state of emergency is still on the table. Wellington Halton Hills MP and the Conservative Party's Foreign Affairs critic in Canada, Michael Chong, is in the news a lot recently after supposedly a Chinese diplomat had made threats to his family. Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino spoke at the Liberal Party's convention to reporters that took place over the course of the past couple of days and even into today as well. Mendicino said that the government is still investigating why warnings that a Conservative MP was never brought to any cabinet minister in particular. And now more on that Liberal Party convention that was held from Thursday up until today. Some key policy discussions happening about how the governing party, the Liberal Party of Canada, will move forward into the next election campaign, which ministers and party commentators did say repeatedly at the event they are hoping is not until 2025. At the convention, it garnered a lot of attention, including keynote speeches from both former Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, who you actually heard from earlier on in the program, and also the former Secretary of State in the U.S. and the former 2016 Democratic presidential nominee,
Hillary Clinton, both of whom spoke at the convention, talking about a range of different issues, specifically zoning in on progressive politics, feminism, as well as with Hillary Clinton in conversation with Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, where they talked very much in depth about the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Also, here is what we can keep watching for. The race for the White House in 2024 is ongoing. Coming up on Monday on the program, I will speak exclusively to former Arkansas governor and 2024 presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson, who is going to join me on the program. Be sure to be on the lookout for that. But one key issue in the 2024 presidential campaign is issues at the U.S. southern border. I spoke with former Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson on that. That conversation will be coming up in just a little bit, so do be sure to stay with us for that conversation as well. All right, let's get some more perspective now from former Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne, who actually joined the program as well on the same day that the passing of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth was announced. I spoke with Premier Wynne about King Charles III, who has now been crowned, the first time a new monarch has been crowned in more than 7 decades. I spoke and asked Premier Wynne about what she makes of the relationship between Ontario, Canada, and the British monarchy.
Joining me now is former Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne. Premier, thanks so much for making the time.
No problem, Wyatt. Nice to talk to you again.
Let's just start out with I know we talked actually too on the day that it was announced that Queen Elizabeth II had passed on. You obviously were the Premier of Ontario. Ontario has a representative of the monarch in this province, obviously with Elizabeth Dowdeswell. What is your reaction as of right now as we are heading into the official coronation, the first time in more than 7 decades that a new monarch will take the reins?
Well, I'm quite interested in it, Wyatt. I think that the history of Canada with the monarchy is obviously a long and rich one. The Queen Elizabeth, Charles's mother, was crowned a month after I was born, so I knew no different than having Queen Elizabeth. And now King Charles, whom I've met. I met him when he was Prince Charles. He came to Wellington, the town of Wellington in Eastern Ontario in 2017. I had an opportunity to walk through a farmer's market with him and with Camilla, and I found them quite personable. So I'm going to be watching the coronation. I think it's a moment in history, and I'm very interested in how it goes and what the differences are between what happened when Queen Elizabeth was crowned and this coronation.
And what do you make of the argument that a lot of people are making that perhaps Canada, given its the monarch's relationship with different segments of the population, like Canada's Indigenous population, for example, that Canada perhaps should part ways with the monarchy? And I guess countering to that, how can people who are directly connected to the monarchy, like King Charles III, work to try and improve some of the historically tense relationships, like the relationship with Indigenous peoples?
Well, it's very interesting. I know there is a large swath of people who believe that we should part ways with the monarchy, but that then becomes a whole question about what our governance model would be. Do we want to be a republic? Are we talking about trying to replicate something like the United States? And that's very, very different from how we have been governed over, since 1867. So I think that's a really big constitutional question, and I don't know if the country wants to go through that right now, wants to have that conversation. But interestingly, the relationship with Indigenous people, between the monarchy and Indigenous people, is a complex one, because I have been on reserves in Northern Ontario. Actually, I was on a reserve with the lieutenant governor and with a member of the royal family a number of years ago when I was premier. And there are Indigenous people who look to the crown, look to the monarchy for protection they feel that that is their primary relationship, and that that group of people might actually be loath to cut those ties. I know that's not the entire Indigenous population, but there certainly are people within that community who have a different view. So I think that we will see the same kind of complexity in many of the communities across the country. I think the other thing is that there are a lot of people who have just decided they don't like Charles. All of the complexity with Diana and that relationship, and I'm not saying it was straightforward. It absolutely wasn't. But, it's interesting to me that William and Kate are more popular than Charles and Camilla, which suggests to me it's less about the monarchy and maybe more about personalities. And I don't know what to do about that.
All right, we're going to take one last break. When we return, another look at some of the headlines that are impacting the North American political sphere in the midst of this historic day with the coronation of King Charles III. Well, the situation in Alberta, Canada, is a dire situation, quite literally, with wildfires raging across the province. Also, as the province is in the midst of a provincial election campaign, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith spoke with reporters earlier today, where she was questioned time and time again as to whether or not she could, and if it was in her powers, to put the election campaign on hold to deal with a more pressing issue. Smith said she has spoken with official opposition NDP leader Rachel Notley, who also happens to be her main competitor in the election campaign, about some of these wildfires and how they are raging across Alberta. Smith also said that looking at the possibility of declaring a province-wide state of emergency is still on the table. Wellington Halton Hills MP and the Conservative Party's Foreign Affairs critic in Canada, Michael Chong, is in the news a lot recently after supposedly a Chinese diplomat had made threats to his family. Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino spoke at the Liberal Party's convention to reporters that took place over the course of the past couple of days and even into today as well. Mendicino said that the government is still investigating why warnings that a Conservative MP was never brought to any cabinet minister in particular. And now more on that Liberal Party convention that was held from Thursday up until today. Some key policy discussions happening about how the governing party, the Liberal Party of Canada, will move forward into the next election campaign, which ministers and party commentators did say repeatedly at the event
they are hoping is not until 2025. At the convention, it garnered a lot of attention, including keynote speeches from both former Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, who you actually heard from earlier on in the program, and also the former Secretary of State in the U.S. and the former 2016 Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton, both of whom spoke at the convention, talking about a range of different issues, specifically zoning in on progressive politics, feminism, as well as with Hillary Clinton in conversation with Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, where they talked very much in depth about the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Also, here is what we can keep watching for. The race for the White House in 2024 is ongoing. Coming up on Monday on the program, I will speak exclusively to former Arkansas governor and 2024 presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson, who is going to join me on the program. Be sure to be on the lookout for that. But one key issue in the 2024 presidential campaign is issues at the U.S. southern border. I spoke with former Homeland Security Secretary Jeh Johnson on that. That conversation will be coming up in just a little bit, so do be sure to stay with us for that conversation as well. All right, hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for being with us. We greatly appreciate it, and welcome back to the program. Of course, I want to touch, before the break, I mentioned that we were going to get into some conversations surrounding the 2024 presidential campaign, specifically some issues that are currently being faced at the southern border. A lot of times you hear the conversation, and the conversation is frequently more so about the actual candidates themselves and not so much about the actual policy issues of substance. And one of those issues is the southern border. I spoke with former Homeland Security Secretary Jeh Johnson about some of those challenges and how they can be addressed. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, recently visited Canada, where he met with the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, and Attorney General Merrick Garland also came to Canada talking about all things immigration. Of course, Roxanne Road, another issue that was impacting immigration as well recently, and that was getting a lot of discussion really across the North American political sphere. Joining me now to touch on some of the latest developments is former Homeland Security Secretary Jeh Johnson. Thanks so much for making the time.
Thanks for having me, Wyatt.
Let's just start out with the overall direction as to where we're headed with countries like Canada, with the U.S., with some of the issues. I mentioned Roxham Road. There's obviously lots of issues at the southern border that are being highlighted as well. What do you make as to kind of all of those things in development?
Well, when I was in office, Canada was, along with Mexico, one of the two countries I dealt with most often throughout the cabinet, not just my Canadian counterpart. I dealt with the Prime Minister, the Attorney General, and a whole host of others. So it's a very, very important relationship on a number of fronts. Immigration, border security, just one of them. There's trade, there's transportation, there's culture. Of course, there's the economy, the level of trade going back and forth, just say on the Windsor Bridge in Detroit is enormous. So anytime I dealt with my Canadian counterparts, we would be talking about a number of issues, not just immigration, not just border security, not just law enforcement. My sense of the relationship today is that it is as strong as ever. I'm pleased that my successor, Secretary Mayorkas, was in Canada recently, and I fully expect that the strong relationship between Canada and the United States will continue. We're so much alike.
And particularly from Republicans as of recently, you hear them criticizing President Biden and the entire administration, Secretary Mayorkas, just two of the people who the Republicans are going after for issues at the southern border. What do you make of the position that President Biden is in, and how can he overcome some of the criticisms that Republicans are making in relation to the southern border?
As you might know, last week, our government announced the standing up of regional processing centers in Central and South America. I think that's a very good idea. I learned years ago when I was in office that you cannot padlock a burning building. You have to give people a way out, a lawful, safe way out. And by establishing regional processing centers, we're giving people the opportunity to enter our country the right way as opposed to the wrong way. I hope that those regional processing centers are adequately financed and supported. And to me, that's a real chance at reducing the numbers that we've seen. Republicans in this country, frankly, use immigration as a what we refer to in American politics, a red meat issue. It's a very, very complicated problem. Frankly, it's a much bigger problem than when I was in office 7, 8, 9 years ago. There are more countries in Central and South America contributing to the problem, and the smugglers are much better at moving larger numbers of people. It's a very complicated problem, and we need bipartisan solutions, not just one side screaming at the other and blaming the other for the problem.
And I mean, how do you end some of that going after, one another for, partisan reasons to actually come to a solution? Because, you hear Republicans a lot, for example, talking about how it's an issue of, separating kids with their families. But I mean, how can, Republicans actually propose solutions, and how can people like President Biden actually take their solutions into account?
Inevitably, solutions to the issue of immigration require bipartisan consensus. We came close 10 years ago. The U.S. Senate passed immigration reform with 68 votes. And since then, that bipartisan consensus has fallen apart. People find it in their political interest to simply sit back and call the other side evil without exercising the political courage to come together.
Well, the situation in Alberta, Canada, is a dire situation, quite literally, with wildfires raging across the province, also as the province is in the midst of a provincial election campaign. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith spoke with reporters earlier today, where she was questioned time and time again as to whether or not she could, and if it was in her powers, to put the election campaign on hold to deal with a more pressing issue. Smith said she has spoken with official opposition NDP leader Rachel Notley, who also happens to be her main competitor in the election campaign, about some of these wildfires and how they are raging across Alberta. Smith also said that looking at the possibility of declaring a province-wide state of emergency is still on the table. Wellington Halton Hills MP and the Conservative Party's Foreign Affairs critic in Canada, Michael Chong, is in the news a lot recently after supposedly a Chinese diplomat had made threats to his family. Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino spoke at the Liberal Party's convention to reporters that took place over the course of the past couple of days and even into today as well. Mendicino said that the government is still investigating why warnings that a Conservative MP was never brought to any cabinet minister in particular. And now more on that Liberal Party convention that was held from Thursday up until today. Some key policy discussions happening about how the governing party, the Liberal Party of Canada, will move forward into the next election campaign, which ministers and party commentators did say repeatedly at the event they are hoping is not until 2025. At the convention, it garnered a lot of attention, including keynote speeches from both former Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, who you actually heard from earlier on in the program, and also the former Secretary of State in the U.S. and the former 2016 Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton, both of whom spoke at the convention, talking about a range of different issues, specifically zoning in on progressive politics, feminism, as well as with Hillary Clinton in conversation with Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, where they talked very much in depth about the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Also, here is what we can keep watching for. The race for the White House in 2024 is ongoing. Coming up on Monday on the program, I will speak exclusively to former Arkansas governor and 2024 presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson, who is going to join me on the program. All right, that's going to do it for our coverage tonight. Thank you so much for being with us for this truly historic day as King Charles III, again, the first monarch to be crowned in more than 7 decades. Thank you so much for being with us. I enjoyed your company.